This afternoon, the White House announced President Trump has been diagnosed with a chronic condition. Med team doctor and infectious disease expert Dr. Ed Dominguez joins us now to talk more about this and a lot more. Dr. Ed, tell us, what's the condition, what are the symptoms, and how is this typically treated?
So venous insufficiency is where you collect a lot of fluid in the extremities. That's really the only symptom that people see. And the extremity is the foot and the ankle. That's the way they first notice they have it. And eventually, if it lasts a long time, there are chronic issues, but hopefully that's not the case here. The way to treat it is very simple. External compression with compression stockings, elevating the feet, doing calf exercises to build up the return of fluid to the heart, and in the end, surgery if this is very severe.
Dr. Ed, scientists in the UK have successfully created 3 parent babies using a method they say prevents devastating and often fatal conditions. This involves adding a second woman's DNA. 8 babies have been born so far using this method. Tell us, why does adding a third person's DNA, specifically from a woman, work in this type of way?
So, Blake, it turns out that they're actually adding a slightly different part of the cell, not so much the DNA as much as RNA from a part of the cell called the mitochondria. The reason they're doing this is that there's about 1 in 5,000 children in the United Kingdom are born with defective mitochondria. These are parts of the cell that are the power plants, and this leads to fatal illnesses early in infancy. By taking an embryo from an affected cell and putting it into a cell from a healthy third parent, in this case a second mother, they can bypass all that, and it's been very successful. The problem is there are 2 embryos, only one of them survives, and that's the original embryo. That's been the ethical problem that other countries have with this procedure.
Data shows 1 in 5 kids is obese, and the number of kids with extremely severe obesity that is, continues to grow. What's driving these obesity rates in kids, and what kind of chronic diseases does this put a kid at risk of developing?
Yeah. So the obesity is being driven by the same thing that drives it in adults, as it turns out: lack of physical activity, poor sleep, horrible diets dependent on processed food and processed sugars, empty calories, genetic issues, medications like antidepressants and things of that nature. The diseases we see are the same ones we see in adults. These will be things like high blood pressure, cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, even things like sleep apnea in children, and liver disease in children. The way we have to get a hold of these issues very, very early. Otherwise, our children are going to be living with chronic diseases for a very long time, Blake.
All right, Dr. Ed, as always, our thanks to you. We're back with more news right after this.